Sounds good. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I know you guys all have busy lives and, we're getting ready for this huge, ginormous snowstorm that's coming in. Look at Daryl. So we're just, I just like to, go around and say, hey, how are you? Who everybody is, reintroduce ourselves. I'm Rachel, town planner in Wrentham. Ella, I'll have you go next.
Okay. Ella, it's great to see everyone again. I feel like it's been a while. So once again, I'm the senior land use planner at MAPC, the regional planning agency for Boston. And I have my colleague here, Christian, working on community engagement for this plan. Carolina was involved early on, and then we're kind of shifting. And Christian's been involved since working on the focus group. So go ahead.
Hey everyone, my name is Christian. Like Ella said, I work at MAPC. Happy to be here.
I'm going to go in order on my screen then. Everett.
Everett Skinner, planning board member, former DPW director.
Yes. Steve Schwarm.
I'm a member of the planning board and been a resident here for many years, more than half my life.
Leo Immonen.
I'm Leo. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission.
Jeff Plant.
Jeff Plant, volunteer member of the committee and about a 41-year resident of town of Wrentham.
Daryl Luce.
Daryl, and I'm the agent for the Conservation Commission. I do see some flakes coming down now.
Diane Glass. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, hey.
I will say that Diane has provided us with a lot of good photos of her, out and about in Wrentham. So there she is.
Yeah, so I'm also a 35-year resident of Wrentham. I've raised 3 kids here during my career. I'm now retired, so I got involved. I used to work with Rebecca Zittermeer at CVS. So we're kind of women who know how to get things done, and she recruited me to be on the landscape committee. So we've been having a lot of fun with being creative in downtown. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. George Labonte.
George Labonte, I'm the Deputy Chief of Police Wrentham, as well as a lifelong resident. I'll probably stay on mute as much as I can so you don't hear my 4 kids screaming upstairs.
Jerry McGovern.
Hi, I'm Jerry McGovern, and I'm currently the Board of Selectmen representative. And Wrentham is actually about the 18th place I've lived in my life, so I'll be the odd man out here.
And Stephanie Duquette.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Hey. Thursday night at 5 o'clock. Hi. I'm here. That's all I can say right now.
All right, with that, thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Ella to take us through.
Great.
Tell us a little story.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks again for joining everyone. We have a packed agenda, and we're going to be digging into some goal setting exercises. So I appreciate everyone for coming. So I'm going to share my screen and give a bit of a presentation, and then we'll do some more interactive discussion. And I tried to use the beautiful photos that Diane submitted. So thanks, Diane. Not only the photos that you submitted, but I think also your artwork in downtown. That may be the content of the photos. So the agenda is that one, right? That's yours?
Yes, we're combining Christmas with Valentine's Day. Why not?
Yeah, important placemaking. Okay, so we'll go over some updates since we last spoke, and then get into the goal setting. So what we're hoping to do is talk about housing. I'll give a presentation on the research that we've done, both community engagement as well as data analysis. And then we'll have a brainstorm and discussion that Christian will lead, and hopefully walk out this evening with some goals drafted. And then we'll do the same thing for economic development. So I'll present some existing conditions, then we'll do a brainstorm and refine. So one question I have is, I like to respect everyone's time, and this had been scheduled for 5 to 6:30. And I wanted to know if 6:30 was a hard stop for anyone, because preferably we would go to 7. Hard stop for Everett
Yes, me too.
and Stephanie. Okay, so we'll try to fit in what we can. It's good that other people might be flexible. Okay, so let's dive in. So in terms of updates, again, it feels like it's been a while since we last spoke, and we've been busy on the back end of things. So it's good to come back to you and kind of hit the ground running as we do some goal setting and actually like plowing ahead. So in terms of the last time we spoke, we reviewed the introduction chapter, and there were some great feedback. A lot of people, seem to really thoroughly read the introduction chapter. I've edited it, and Jerry and I have been working on updating the history section, so we have that done. One of the main feedback was that we wanted to add what has actually happened since the 2004 plan. So that's what we've tried to focus on, and we created a matrix. Actually, a matrix had already been created of all the goals and strategies in the 2004 plan. And we've sent that to town staff as well as the planning board to give us some feedback on. Unfortunately, we haven't gathered much feedback on the progress made on those goals and strategies, but Jerry, Rachel, and I have been working on summarizing that progress. So I think we should probably share a draft with you of that summary of progress since the 2004 plan soon. Jerry, do you want to add anything on that report? You're on mute.
I saw what you gave me recently on the what's been implemented. I think that's the same thing that went out to the town to react on. Is that right?
I also had a write-up that I just sent to you, kind of assuming that the town wouldn't respond to the particular goals and strategies.
Okay, so that actually was where I was trying to get to. I think if we shared that, it might jog people a little more.
Okay.
Well, wait a second, I did this or we did that. As Ella mentioned, she's been a little frustrated, as I, if we've not gotten hardly any feedback from folks. So we said, take a look at this and see if there's other things on here that are important that happened in the last 15 years, whatever, to add to that. So maybe Ella, if you shared what you have as the most recent update, which was really good stuff with a lot of good detail on it, it might kind of help break the dam loose a little bit.
That sounds good. I think that's a good next step. Okay, and then finally, we've been conducting focus groups as promised. So with businesses, seniors, residents that are people of color, and we had a couple interviews with residents of affordable housing in Wrentham. So we partner with the Housing Authority, Senior Center, and the United Chamber on outreach. We didn't speak to, the focus groups weren't big, they were pretty small, but we did speak to someone in each target population. And I've emailed the summary of all the findings from those focus groups and incorporated them into the presentation as well. But I encourage you to take a look at those findings. And the town has generously, and I think appropriately, also provided a $25 gift certificate to the focus group participants to compensate them for their time. So that's great. And in particular, I just wanted to draw attention to some of what we heard in follow-up to the survey questions, because there were particular questions that we wanted to dig into more. So one question that we asked at the focus group with residents of color was, how can Wrentham be more welcoming to people of color, as it's part of the vision statement to be more welcoming? And some of the things we heard seemed like, great suggestions that the town could definitely implement. Very feasible tips. So one is a welcome packet with information about events and activities in town. Another is, I mean, this is hard during COVID, but focusing on hosting events that help folks get to know their neighbors and maybe have food trucks or a cultural day and some shared food. And then we asked, how can Wrentham make it easier to participate in and influence local decision making? So as a reminder, we asked this question on the survey, the townwide survey, and found that this was a high priority strategy for residents of color, whereas it wasn't for white residents or folks who didn't identify their race. So we wanted to kind of unpack that. And what we heard, and again, this is just from a sample, so this doesn't represent everyone, but what we heard from the focus group was some frustration about the website. So the digital sign is great and it advertises these exciting events. And the example given was a cooking class. And this person was really interested in taking the cooking class and then tried to go on the website to find out more about the cooking class and couldn't find out like how to join the cooking class. So that seems like definitely something that could be addressed, as well as providing photos of members of the Board of Selectmen and other decision makers to kind of understand who's making the decisions. And then a summary of how decisions are made on the website. So the comment was made that people moving from cities to towns might not be familiar with the legislative process and town meeting in Wrentham. And so it'd be helpful just to have a summary of that. So as I'm not totally sure, to be honest, how we can fold these suggestions in to this first phase of the master plan, since we're focusing on housing and economic development, but I really want to share this because they seemed like very concrete steps. Okay. With that, we'll dig into housing. So again, I'm going to give a presentation about 10 minutes long, and then we're going to dig into the goal setting. So I sent everyone 2 documents that summarize the community engagement and the research that we did. So I really encourage you, if you haven't had the time, they're long, I understand. I totally understand. I wrote them. They're long. But as the steering committee, we really encourage you to take the time to read that. And I welcome any feedback you have. I think if you can send that feedback, what did I say? Maybe by Monday, that would be great. But if you need an extension on that, that'd be fine. But these existing conditions really tee up what the master plan should address. So I'll summarize them here, but I encourage you to read the full documents. Okay, so for background, let's just remind ourselves of the vision that we established a few months ago. So who wants to read this out? How about Steve? You want to read the vision statement to remind us? You're on mute.
Yeah, the vision statement is Wrentham is a charming town, proud of its downtown open spaces and a great place to raise a family. More than 1,000 of us have come together through public process to set a vision of the future. So by 2030, we aspire to continue to cultivate a community-oriented and welcoming culture for all, regardless of race, religion, or age. Protect more farmland and open space for cultural heritage, scenic beauty, habitat, and water quality. Become more walkable and bikeable with sidewalks and trails. Strengthen the downtown with more mom and pop shops, small businesses, homes, and places to gather. Maintain the rural landscape by promoting sustainable land use patterns and shifting away from sprawling development. encouraging diversity with a mix of housing options and affordability to young adults, families, households with lower incomes, and seniors. Ensuring physical responsibility while maintaining high-quality infrastructure and services. To effectively pursue and strike balance between these goals and encourage transparent governance, strong civil engagement, and volunteerism.
Great, thank you. So as we do our goal setting this evening, this is our North Star, just to remind us. Okay, so what we found in the research. Quick facts, about 4,000 households, a third of them have children. There's a little fewer than 3 people per household, relatively high median income of 113,000. In terms of the housing units, the stock, there are a little more than 4,000 units, so really low vacancy rate. Almost all the units have a household in them. 17% of the housing units are rented. The median cost of buying a home fluctuates from year to year. Most recently, it was a little less than 500,000. The monthly median cost of renting a home also totally fluctuates from year to year, but most recently it was $2,200. There's 485, so a little more than 10% of the units are deed restricted. Actually, fewer than 485 are deed restricted, but 485 are on the subsidized housing inventory maintained by the state. And there's a series of tools, municipal housing tools. So the Wrentham Housing Authority, which manages 2 projects, the Community Preservation Act, which raises funds that can be used for affordable housing. Recently, Wrentham became a housing choice community, so we're eligible for certain grants. And there's been some great recent zoning updates. So those are the quick facts. And then based on the research, I pulled together 5 main themes. Would love feedback on these themes. If these are really the issues that you think we need to address, and if these are the issues after reading the existing conditions research you think are the most salient. But I'll go through each one and I'll walk you through all the charts, so you don't need to read anything just yet. So the first one, there's a mismatch between the housing and the jobs in Wrentham. So people who work here and work in the jobs can't afford to live here. And the people who live here have long commutes to their distant jobs. So this chart is one example of that. So in the green is the median price of a house that could be affordable to people who live here. So and then the red is the median price of a single family home in Wrentham. So people who live here have a pretty high income, $113,000. They can basically afford to stay here. Their income allows them to buy something that'd be around 500,000, more than the median. However, when you look at the income levels of median fire department staff, they'd be able to afford something lower, like 300,000. When you look at teachers who are working in Wrentham schools, it's more like 250. And when you look at people who are working in retail, which is most of the people who are working in Wrentham, it's far less. So this slide illustrates that the housing in Wrentham doesn't match the needs of people who work here. And you'll see in the economic development assessment that the jobs in town don't match the needs of residents. So these people who live here are going elsewhere to work. And that means they have long commutes. Another interesting theme is that this is true for renting too. You know, oftentimes we think renting is cheap. You might not be able to buy a home, but you can rent. So almost 1 in 5 Wrentham households rent, which might be surprising, and they have unique challenges. In particular, the cost of rent is like dramatically increasing. It's doubled over the past few years. So this slide is similar, but focuses on rent. So it also focuses on the main industries in Wrentham. So the main industries are in accommodation and food services, retail, healthcare, all of these. In particular, retail and education, between those two industries, they account for 60% of the jobs in Wrentham. And let's say you're working in retail, which 40% of the people who work in Wrentham work in retail. You're making about $1,700 a month. And the median rent is $1,300 a month. So it would be really unaffordable if you're making this to rent. Now, some of these people have maybe more than one job. Some of them might be high schoolers, but 40% of the jobs in Wrentham are here. Again, if you're in education, 20% of the jobs are in education. You might be able to afford to rent, but you're going to be spending more than 30% of your income. So that's what this darker green is 30% of your income. You're going to be spending more than 30% of your income on rent, which technically means you're cost burdened by housing. So that was another theme from the research. Third, while Wrentham's median income is relatively high, 113,000, Wrentham's middle class is shrinking. And there's a chart in the draft that shows this. But in terms of the middle class, Wrentham has the smallest percentage of middle income households. So out of all neighboring municipalities, so like Plainville and Bellingham. So only a quarter of households earn between 75,000 and 150,000. So that's 25%. In comparison, 40% in Plainville and 30% in Norfolk earn that kind of middle income, what I'm calling middle income, 75 to 150. So Wrentham's middle class is shrinking. So there's people making a lot of money, and there are still people making lower income. So there's a large portion of low income residents, which also might be surprising. Almost 30% of households in Wrentham qualify for affordable housing, for deed restricted affordable housing. 30% of the houses are not deed restricted. So what that means is for every one affordable housing unit, there are 2.4 eligible households in Wrentham. A fourth theme that emerged from the research, and definitely the community engagement and like the public forum that we had in the fall, but there's a shortage of smaller homes to meet the changing demographics. And residents are frustrated with development of McMansions. So we saw that response in the survey back in the fall. Recent zoning reform to allow accessory dwelling units. So those are like granny flats or in-law units, smaller units that are within single family homes. Recent zoning reform has been great and has been met with high demand to help meet that shortage of smaller homes. So this chart kind of demonstrates this mismatch. So the darker green is the households, the lighter green is the unit. So there's about 700 one-person households in Wrentham and only 260 one-bedroom homes. And then if you look at two-person households, there are far more two-person households than units with two-bedroom homes. So that's not always one-to-one, but basically there are a lot more smaller households than there are smaller units. So what does this mean? Why do we care? It means that smaller households, so that's like young adults looking to move back to Wrentham, or families wanting to buy their first home, or one-parent households, divorced households, or whatever, seniors looking to downsize, all of those folks are competing for limited housing choices. Or they stay in housing that might be bigger than what they need, costly to maintain, or kind of unaffordable to maintain because they're bigger than what they need. And as I mentioned, community, like what we heard from the focus groups definitely confirms this. Finally, another main theme was that the recent downtown rezoning provides opportunity for new housing, but it hasn't happened yet. And so we look forward to digging into what might be the reasons for why that hasn't happened yet, why there haven't been proposals. So this is a map of that rezoning. Some of you, I'm sure, were really involved. Maybe others are new to it. But the idea with the rezoning is definitely to preserve the existing Main Street character and then kind of extend it back into the vacant Tyco, Crosby Valve sites to include both residential and commercial uses. And then as we get further from from South Street, to have just residential uses. So I asked my colleague who actually worked on this project, Josh, about it. And he said, back when the zoning was adopted, it was estimated that it could create the potential for about 230 new housing units. That's what it could accommodate. Okay, so with that, those are some main themes that we learned from the data analysis and community engagement. To move from those kind of issues to goals, we have some examples of master plan housing goals. So these are the goals from 2004. Let's see, does someone want to read those out so we mix up the voices? All right, Everett. Remember to unmute yourself. Great.
Examples of Wrentham in 2004. Housing. Direct growth to village centers. Protect the remaining rural character. Provide a mix of housing options affordable to seniors, town employees, and young families.
Great. Here's another example. So Bellingham just worked on a master plan, so I thought that might be relevant to us. And these are their housing goals. You want to keep on going, Everett?
Housing. Updated zoning to create opportunities to encourage diversity in housing options. Meet and maintain Mass General Laws 40B, 10% of affordable housing requirement. Maximize opportunities to existing housing stock. Encourage transit-oriented development projects, and review zoning initiatives that could allow greater housing densities and options for senior population.
Great, thank you. And then here's a final example from Cohasset. MAPC does a lot of master plans, and this is just a recent one that we did to kind of demonstrate the options. I think we can probably just skip this, and we've gotten a good sense of what the goals can be. So with that, we'd like to transition into brainstorming our own goals. Before we do that, are there any questions? I presented a lot of information. And are there any questions or concerns before we dive into goal setting?
Hello, this is Jeff. Oh, go ahead, Steph. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Ladies first, please.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So just wondering if, I know that there's a lot of work behind all these numbers, but there's been a big project at Ledgeview that opened up with a very large apartment complex. And do those numbers in any way come into this report?
Good point. They might not. It's really hard and if you like, when you read the report, unfortunately, I bounced around in the year that I was analyzing sometimes just based on data, but those Ledgeview apartments might not be incorporated. Rachel, do you know more?
Depending on what data, like set is being used. Are you talking about for like the total year-round housing or in our affordable count?
It's assisted living and senior. It provided a lot of new units.
Yeah, that the All-American is the assisted living and senior, but then there's the three apartment buildings that are all, those are, that's a 40B project.
Right, and
Um,
it's nearing full occupancy, so
Yeah,
And it
the-
also-
it
yeah,
does
those
make,
are
it does
counted.
make a difference. I think it would make the numbers look a lot better than they do right now if that data is available and can be included.
That's a great point. Well, I think that even if the data is not available, we can add that to the existing conditions. Rachel and I can work together on that to make sure it's reflected, even if it's not like in the census data yet or the state's data yet.
And I'd like to comment on the number of 2-bedroom and mores that that have less than full occupancy. I happen to be a senior that lives in the house we bought when we moved here, and the kids are gone. We couldn't afford to move anywhere else and live like we do now. The new senior housing that's being built and that which is being proposed is more expensive and way bigger house than what we live in. So I don't know that chart fully explains why there's more housing units than there are people in the units. Kind of skews things a little, I think. Once you've paid for your house and all you have to do is maintain it, it's pretty expensive to move into something that's more expensive and bigger when you're trying to go into smaller and less expensive. So I think at least what we've done so far, well, what's been built based on the zoning that we've approved, because we have approved senior living housing, just hasn't turned out to be of any economic benefit to me, to seniors that currently live in Wrentham. We're probably going to get a lot of seniors that don't live here moving in because it is less expensive than wherever they're living in the Boston area.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so the point of that chart was to show that there aren't good options for smaller housing. So if you want to downsize, there aren't many options.
Yeah. Okay, that I could take as long as that's what we're trying to show.
Okay.
There aren't.
I'll clarify that.
There aren't any single floor, 2-bedroom, or even 1-bedroom with a spare type room available in Wrentham, at least at the cost of what our existing 3-bedroom house is worth.
And I think another thing that would be interesting is, and I'm not exactly sure how to present it, but it would be interesting to see what the average income as well as the median, and I understand the advantage of that. But I think one of the things that skews it is that there's some very high income people that live in town. And that might, the median is the number to use, and I agree with that. But I think part of the problem we've got is we've got a lot of on the high end and a lot on the bottom end, and as you say, the middle is going away.
Great points. Yeah.
Hey, Ella, this
Yeah.
is Jeff. I had 2 quick questions. And again, this may not be relative to this, but I'll ask it anyway. The first one, with everything that's going on with COVID, and there is a little bit of we'll call it an outflux from some of the urban centers because people are looking to try to get out of the cities and maybe get more into the suburbs because of COVID. Is that something that, we're going to have to be mindful of, hoping that, the pandemic is going to subside? I don't think we'll ever get back to normal before the pandemic, but I'm just wondering what kind of wave that's going to cause a little bit as we look for some of the planning here for the numbers. And the second question I wanted to ask, and maybe I'll just ask my zoning and planning colleagues and town officials, is the downtown area that we have designated for development for the rezoning. will that support, from an infrastructure perspective, will that support like the number of housing units that we're hoping to be able to put in there? I'm assuming that all got looked at, but I'm curious if that has any impact on why it hasn't been developed yet.
Great questions. So in terms of COVID, Lord knows what the impacts will be. But I think I looked more at that in the economic development, but I think it's a great idea to try to find some trends in the housing market and how that might impact Wrentham. I feel like there's anecdotes from both sides. I just spoke with someone in the real estate market in Boston that actually prices are not going down within Boston, even though it seems like people are leaving Boston. So, you know, I don't think that we'll have definitive, conclusive data on that, but I think that's a great thing to add to the discussion. And in terms of infrastructure, I believe that that figure of how much housing could be built was based on sewer being built. But I welcome anyone to add anything to that, because that's important.
That's correct, Ella's. And actually Jeff Spratt could have spoken to this, but that is going to be the big price tag, is creating a private wastewater treatment facility. And I think that is, along with other things, that's also what has stalled the development. I'm not going to, you know, it's definitely the regulations. The people that own the parcels were part of the talks of the rezoning. So it's not like the town did anything and it was a surprise to the developer, the owners of the property. So they were involved in that process, but they are focusing on other areas of their business. And this is sort of taken a back burner.
Great questions. Okay, I'm going to now pivot to Christian and the goal setting. And I don't think I need to share my screen. I'll just put the Jamboard link in the chat. Oh, I am sharing my screen. Look at that. Sorry about that.
Great. So like Ella said, we're going to be using Jamboard to do some collective brainstorming. So you should be able to click on the link and open it. The link is in the chat. And if you are having trouble finding the chat, it's just, if you look on the bottom of if you're on your computer, you look on the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that says chat. But I see a bunch of people are joining us on the Jamboard. We have 4 folks so far, more people, I think, actually, than this one's showing up. So for those of you who are here on the left side of the screen on the Jamboard, you'll see a sort of toolbar looking situation. And in the middle of that, there's what looks like a little piece of paper with 2 lines on it, and the corner is turned up. That is your sticky note. So if you click that, it will open up a little box, and you can write like you can use that to write an example goal for the brainstorm. So if you would rather write them in the chat, please do that too, and I can take them from the chat and put them into the Jamboard for us, and then I'll share my screen at the end so that we can make sure that we're all looking at it. But for the next couple of minutes, it would be great if you could just put some sticky notes in here that are some example housing goals that you think you would like to see considered for the master plan. And then after we have some time to enter some goals, we'll come back and have a brainstorm discussion about about what is on the Jamboard. And I think also, if you're interested in writing something that you think is missing from the conversation, please feel free to do that on the Jamboard as well. I see someone just added inclusionary zoning bylaw. So whoever wrote that is the first person to get a sticky note on the Jamboard. So I'll give us a little bit of time to get started. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Happy to assist. And I should say also, I'm noticing that other people are doing this, but it will open your sticky note. It'll put it over the example goal that Ella has included already. And if you just click on it, you can drag it somewhere else.
And again, if you're frustrated by the Jamboard, just enter ideas into the chat and we'd be happy to put them on the Jamboard. The idea is just to try to have like a brainstorm like we would if we were all together. Throw those Post-its up there and then we'll try to narrow it down.
Am I the only one? I'm afraid to touch anything.
And I can't seem to get a sticky note that I can type in.
Yeah.
So
I'm technologically challenged on how to do this modern, as opposed
if you
to
would
just,
rather, are you on your computer, Diane?
yes.
If you would rather type into the chat instead of using the Jamboard, like into the chat in
Okay.
Zoom,
Okay.
do that. And then I'll just take what you write and I'll put it into the Jamboard. And
Okay.
likewise, Everett, for you, if that's easier.
I just don't know how to get it in. I'm not afraid of putting it in there. I just don't know how.
Oh.
What do I click on to get a sticky note?
So
Here,
on the left,
I'm sharing
on
my
the,
screen now too, which might help.
Oh,
So I'm
sticky notes. I get it.
circling.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you click on the link in the chat, it should look like this, and then I'll model it. So you go over here and you click that, and then you say,
I can't.
build housing downtown. And then you press
Right.
save and it'll go there. And that's what it looks like. But again, if you don't want to do that, go ahead and enter in the chat.
I'll also say that if we think of things during the discussion afterwards, I can also add them as we're talking so that we make sure that we get all of the ideas that we think of onto the Jamboard. Okay, so we got some good stuff. So I'll give us a couple more minutes just to keep adding some things. And then we can start our brainstorm discussion.
Christian, you know, if you shared your screen now, we could see everybody's showing up at the same time,
Happy to do that.
rather than having to have a separate screen for it.
Let me.
The only thing we should be
Wait, one
clear about
second.
is when you share your screen, you can't then add Post-its to that shared screen. So if everyone's done, we can do that.
So why don't I share? I think I haven't seen any new Post-its in a little bit.
I'm surprised that that doesn't work. I think it would work.
So does this, can everyone
yeah.
see the
But you have
screen
to
at the moment?
still have to do it with the other screen, that's all.
Right, right. Yep.
But we can see other people's being added. That was the intent, I guess.
Right. You should be able to see everyone's on your Jamboard.
Right. I can, but I can't see what other people are doing. But
Okay.
if I change my comment, it'll move. Okay.
So can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
And you can see it with the Jamboard?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I took some of a little bit of time to sort of, it seems like there are two big trends that I'm noticing, and I'm wondering if you agree. One is sort of housing goals related to changing the zoning. And those are in the column where the big sticky just says zoning. And then there are some other housing goals that aren't necessarily, like the rest don't really fall into one group, but some of them are sort of like about encouraging the production of different kinds or more types of housing, restricting housing size, I see, determining likely cost of potential new housing units, and whether they would meet our needs for residents, especially local workers. So that's more of like an analysis goal as opposed to changing the zoning or adding a new zoning bylaw or something like that. So I'm wondering, now that you're looking at all of these goals on the screen, what are some things that come to mind for you now that you're seeing these? I just got one more goal, so I'm going to add that. Any initial thoughts about what you're seeing?
Actually, that last one that went up about the, the state school.
Yeah.
If that is a potential valuable resource for the town, but it is state-owned property, and is that something that needs legislative approval before that could even be considered to be converted over for potential town use?
Probably.
Yeah, my quick answer would be yes.
Yes, it does. Had to do this in Grafton with their old state school that was half owned or operated by Job Corps. And it is an act of the legislature to get a portion of the land taken out of state control. And it does take a long time. And I will say in the 2 years and 3 months I've been here, I have sent multiple emails to people at DCR trying to find out what their long-term plan is, because there's a lot of state schools in Massachusetts that are no longer in operation, and there's a lot of buildings on that property, the Wrentham Development Center, that are on the historic register that are not being used and falling into disrepair. So if anybody else knows who to contact.
Rachel, have we contacted folks directly at Wrentham Development Center? Because they may have, in talking to them, and I'll just won't dwell on it, but I know back in 2000 when we were looking at taking over the development center treatment plant, they were basically going to give it to the town with just the understanding that they have space reserved in it. Long story short, that got shot down, but if that was something that was available again, if they were willing to do that and we could facilitate that, that may be a big thing right there, because that may take care of some potential infrastructure needs that we have. So even if we couldn't touch some of the historic buildings on the site, some of the infrastructure that they have already there and some of the land may be a valuable resource to help us with some of the long-term planning we're looking to try to do in the downtown area.
Yes, definitely. But any property, it is an act of the legislature that anything has to, so it does take time. I want to say I can follow up, with that. I think I did reach out to somebody over there, but it's something that we can definitely talk, add in on this too.
It's been a long time, but Foxborough State Hospital, they converted that.
Yep.
It's my understanding, and those of you who've been around longer, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that this, there was potential for development on that site. And that's why it was rezoned to recreation to prevent the development of that housing. So certainly if it feels like there's a change in community sentiment to promote housing on that site, that would be great. And things shift, absolutely, and the needs shift. But it's interesting to revisit that.
Yeah, we may have to do a little bit of a multi-pronged probe into it, by trying to go through DCR, trying to utilize the folks at the development center, maybe talking to our state legislators kind of from different angles to try to see if that's something that, we can, could do something with.
I'm also wondering if you're sort of, as you're looking at this, is there anything that stands out as particularly crucial? Like any of these goals that you have in front of you, do you think if you could pick one that is a must have, which one do you think that would be?
If I had a choice, I guess restricted housing size, because that would bring down the cost of it. Even though land's out of sight as well, but we have zoning that allows clustering and reduced lot size. So, but even on those restricted lot size right now, we got a subdivision that's building houses that are worth $400,000 to $500,000 on a $240,000 lot. So you end up with a $720,000 house, which is not affordable to those who can't afford housing in Wrentham, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of things that are here, we thought we did to solve the problem, and it really didn't. Housing continues to be, preferred housing in Wrentham continues to be in the high costs. And
does revenue ever come into play on this? I mean, if someone builds an $800,000 house and they're taxed on that, versus the same lot that builds a $240,000 house, obviously the revenue is going to be much different. Is that incorporated in any of this?
That's an interesting idea, and definitely in the economic development chapter, we go into the municipal finances. From my experience, development is not usually driven by, it's the developer who's choosing what to develop within what's allowable within the zoning and the regulations. So
based on the market, because if people are buying those big houses, then they're going to keep building the big houses.
Based on the market, but unfortunately, zoning totally interferes with the market. So for example, a lot of the housing in Wrentham, like around the lakes, are on very small lots, on less than quarter-acre lots. Those are currently illegal to build. A lot of the housing in Wrentham right now could not be built. So even if there's a market for those smaller houses, the developers can't meet that market because our zoning limits it. So sometimes we think of housing as like a free market. Unfortunately, due to past planning decisions, the market is very skewed, and developers can't always build what the market demands because of the restrictions.
Well, it's lot sizes and stuff like that are what's driving that, correct?
Yes.
Somewhere in your report, I couldn't use a printer here. There's a requirement, right, that a lot has to be a certain size, even though we have so many non-conforming lots that are just fine for a house. I mean, to me, the zoning has got to be changed. Knowing a developer, he'll say the same thing. I'm going to build the biggest house I can, even though it's totally out of place. We all know where some of those houses are, and he's going to do it because he knows there are buyers out there. So the zoning to me has to be changed. So there are a lot of non-conforming lots that can have perfectly acceptable, I think in the report, as you said, some of the best neighborhoods in Wrentham are wonderful. you know, with a 2,000 square foot house should be more than enough. The bedrooms don't need to be huge. And you can still have a 2-car garage. And households are getting smaller. People aren't going to have as many kids. They're not going to want to heat such big houses. I'm not sure this idea of having these super big houses, that there's going to be a market for them in the future. With the tax rate going up, since we still have primarily residential. I know, I guess we're getting a bit of tax break this year, but we've got to encourage smaller houses for, you know, divorced people, elderly, aging, empty nesters, and it's just not here. That's why we've got friends that they're moving to Florida. They're moving to North Carolina, you know?
If I could ask Ella and Christian, what nearby communities are, I guess, being able to put more affordable houses in?
Yeah, so there's affordable housing is a complicated term because with the big A, that's what we say in the existing conditions. A big A means it's actually deed restricted. So you have to be low income to live in it. Versus just lower cost housing that we can buy. That is affordable, is lower A. That's how we distinguish. There's a lot of interest across the region about how to encourage smaller housing. So actually we're working with Foxborough on different zoning strategies of how we can encourage smaller, lower cost housing.
What Diane mentioned there was, why not have some sort of offset, or rather tiered approach to taxation where, you know, under 2,400 square feet, you know, you're at $14 and change a thousand. Whereas if you go above that number, then you have a higher number, your per thousand tax rate.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. Again, it's my understanding that the developer will build the biggest, as Diane said, the biggest that they can. The developer is not paying the taxes, but changing permit fees might encourage the developer to build smaller housing. But it's not that people don't want smaller housing, it's that developers won't build it.
Right. I've talked to a couple builders about, you know, some of these, and what they told me was even when they have just a couple moving in brand new to the market, they want the largest house possible because they believe that that will have the largest return when they go to sell it in 3 to 5 years.
It sounds like you're saying that to a certain extent, the developers are responding to actual buyers who are asking for those enormous houses too.
Right. You go into the Eagle Brook subdivision and take a look at the demographics there. They're all young people that are working in the city.
Interesting.
So I'm sorry, it's probably hard to read because I'm shifting everything around because Christian shifted it and now I'm also shifting it. But I've added some Post-its in orange up here to try to synthesize these ideas to get towards actual goals. So I think that's this discussion of like, how do we build or how do we encourage smaller housing is really interesting. And there's a variety of strategies. But I think the goal would be something like encourage housing options that are smaller and lower cost. And then another goal that I'm seeing is guiding, similar to what we already have in the 2004 master plan, guide development towards existing village centers and areas with existing municipal infrastructure. And then I think a strategy that we could come up with later to achieve that goal would be to potentially pursue development at the state school. Like that would be one strategy within this bigger goal. Do we see like a third or fourth? It seems like there's consensus around these. Do we see like a third or fourth missing goal here? Perhaps around.
I guess my concern, and maybe this is part of the brainstorming thing, is what is it that we need to do to make it easier for people to have more compressed housing at a lower cost? And my concern, for example, with one of the proposals we're looking at the planning board is they want to put a senior housing thing in the middle of nowhere, Western Wrentham. there's two problems with that as I see it. One of them is there's nothing there other than this group of houses. And there's not even anything that you can walk to other than a fire station. And it's not really what we kind of were thinking of when we were talking about senior housing, is to put them in the middle of nowhere. Now, things like public transportation might be something that would be helpful in making those kinds of things much more reasonable. And I don't know how we can go about doing it other than, you know, talking to a bus company to run buses or something like that. And
Right.
what
Okay.
do adjacent towns do? What does Franklin do for that? Because they have a train station, which gives them a real plus.
Yeah, so I think that, again, to try to like focus in, I mean, that's a great question. And a lot of municipalities are trying to figure out, yeah, how do you limit that kind of greenfield development, sprawl in the middle of nowhere? So there's land conservation strategies. There's strategies to cluster development and then protect open space. That's a zoning option. And there's
that's
ways,
basically what the senior living is supposed to encourage, but in this case, they aren't executing it well. That's my personal opinion. But
and I think that yeah, none of us expected senior housing to go, at least in that particular spot. But it certainly, what they've proposed loosely fits the zoning that the town adopted. And I'll say that my opinion of it, it remains quiet until I vote on it as a planning board member. But the guide that you have up there, it says develop towards existing village centers with an S. That is one of Wrentham's village centers. And I'm not sure that we want to keep saying village centers.
okay.
That because throughout the document that we've been providing and working from, it says village centers. And the people that live out there in Sheldonville certainly don't want any kind of cluster zoning in their village center. But at least that's what we heard at the planning board meeting a month ago.
Yeah.
So should this be guide development towards town center?
Yeah, that would do it.
Or the village center?
Yeah.
And areas with existing municipal.
I mean, somebody typed that. Maybe I didn't. Somebody may have an opinion as to why they said centers rather than town center. And maybe it's just a mistake. I don't know, but at least sitting on the board that oversees all of these projects that are proposed, the people that are currently living in Sheldonville want no part of dense zoning in their center.
Okay, I've typed up the orange ones, and village centers was from the 2004 master plan.
Right.
So maybe that's something we want to change, which we definitely can.
I guess I have a question too, is what can we as a town do? Because I'm seeing some of these, encourage housing options at a smaller and lower cost. So we've done zoning for the downtown area to try to encourage that. So maybe, getting this other one, guide development towards the town center in areas with existing municipal infrastructure. If we could get senior housing down there, to Steve's point, we don't really have to worry about busing because everything's right there. We've got medical facilities right there. We've got, existing and planned, stores and things. But if the impetus is for a developer to build somewhere else, what can we as a town do to try to get the developers to develop that area? What can we do to facilitate it for them so that we can get them to build something affordable in that area, which would serve a lot of what we're trying to do with this?
Yeah, well, that's a great question that we got to figure out. I mean, I think the first step is just agreeing that is a goal, and that's what this goal setting is. And then the tools, and there's a summary of some of the tools in the existing conditions, but zoning is definitely a big one. And
But have-
then, yeah, go ahead.
Have we already done that though? Do we already have the zoning that we need so that we could get some of this development, especially the residential,
In
affordable development?
center, I believe we have.
Right.
Okay.
So the town center recently updated zoning and it's great.
Yep. Okay.
So probably isn't needed there. But as I mentioned, there's still zoning, there's still other challenges to the zoning. For example, the lot size throughout the town. So as I mentioned, and Diane pointed to, the lovely neighborhoods, especially around the lake and in some of the older neighborhoods, are in much smaller parcels. Under the current zoning, those would be prohibited. They would not be able to be built.
Don't we also have a sewage issue though with that? I mean, you need a certain amount of space just to put in the appropriate size septic system.
That's true. So we can get into the nitty gritty of what those zoning reforms could be, but to agree on the fact that we want to guide development to the village center, and we want to look at how to encourage developers to build smaller housing is a good goal, and there are strategies to get us there.
Yeah.
And it might not necessarily, I mean, at least if we're looking at other locations, yes, smaller housing units. But if we're looking at the town center area, then obviously it's not necessarily smaller units. It's going to be different units, multi-story units that are, meeting the 1 or the 2 bedroom requirements, have the infrastructure that's necessary and things like that. So.
Yeah.
What are we, just out of curiosity, what are we allowing in the zoning? I don't know what it is offhand, but what do we allow in the zoning for, like, how many stories the buildings can be in that new downtown area, in the old Crosby Valve area?
I know it's more than 1, so I don't know whether it's 3, but I don't remember it as being real tall.
Okay.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Do you remember, Rachel?
Hold, please. Looking it up now.
I think it's 3.
I think it's 3.
Yes, 3. 2.5
Okay.
in the front and 3 in the back.
Okay, so to zoom out a little bit, it sounds like, I mean, we've talked a lot about the smaller housing and like what can we actually do as a town to encourage that? Is it up to developers or bigger market? But it seems like there's interest in that as a goal. Seems like there's definitely interest in the village center. I have added these 2 other orange Post-its about, it seems like there was some ideas about affordable housing, so deed restricted low income housing. And then kind of riffing off of the idea of discouraging housing in isolated areas and open space. Do those 4 goals feel like they capture it? Do you think some of them are, do you think any of these are irrelevant and shouldn't be a goal? And maybe we can hear from folks that we haven't heard from yet.
I would also add seniors somewhere in one of those. Maybe on the promote affordable housing for lower income and senior households. I don't, or maybe on the first one.
But I equate very closely with Everett's comments is that currently when they do a senior housing, they put in houses that are more expensive than they're moving out of, which were larger houses than they're moving into, which doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how we can encourage them to build senior housing that is more affordable.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because the state's definition of a senior is 55 and older, and a lot of the I'll say people that, at least that I know, that are approaching 55 are in the apex of their earnings, and they're not concerned about costs. They're just concerned about moving into something that they have less maintenance.
Yep. Yep, I agree.
And we got some interesting facts on the planning board that I'm sure Rachel can share with you from the existing cluster zone development that's being built, some 92 odd lots, as to the ages that are moving in there and the number of people that are living in these $700,000 to $800,000 houses. It sure surprised me. I'm still trying to digest the numbers, but
That was a surprise, wasn't it?
yeah. One of the buyers is a single mother of one. I don't know where she's making her money, but I'd like to I'd supply her with paper for the press.
Okay. Yeah, I also don't know how people afford those houses. And it's across the region. It's like, where are these people coming from? But
yeah, we've certainly got things to consider, but I don't think that there's any simple solution to it based on what's currently going on in Massachusetts economy.
Yeah.
The rich are far richer, and the poor are much poorer, or less able to earn income, if you want to say it, I guess, in polite words. So I'm willing to discuss ideas, but short of saying that in this area you can only build, and I think a 2,000 square foot house is a big house, but seems I live in a 1,265 square foot house. But that's what people are expecting. Some of these houses have closets bigger than my bedroom.
I'm wondering if, I think these are like a great discussion. I'm wondering if Jerry or Leo or Stephanie or anyone else, or George, if you have any thoughts about the goals that we have up on the screen.
So the thing that's going across my mind as I'm looking at these different categories and the different ideas, this is not necessarily a goal, what I'm going to state, but before we make any changes or improvements, I think we have to be able to make the case why we have to do that. You're going to have an awful lot of people saying, "What's wrong with what we have right now? Why do I need to? Why does Wrentham need to change?" When we've made significant changes over the past 10 or 15 years, where we were successful was because we could always convince a good part of the populace that this was necessary. We used things like we needed to generate more revenue to do that. We needed to make sure, in the case of the downtown, because that was previously zoned as industrial commercial, we wanted to make sure there wasn't some factory going in there with trucks and going 24 hours a day and melting steel and stuff like that. All of these are great ideas, and I think Ella, I think you've done a pretty good job of categorizing. They all make sense. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there. To do any of this, we have to make the case why.
Great point. And I think that the data supports these things. And I think the good thing is that this is not coming from just the steering committee. Like what we've heard from the community thus far, I think is consistent with these goals. But we certainly don't want to, promote goals that are way off, out of touch with what the community wants. But I really appreciate that making the point. And not only to the community, but to the planning board and select board who we want to adopt this master plan.
I know, Stephanie, I think you might have been about to say something.
About to say something? Yes, I actually had a thought, and it's regarding the guide development towards the village center. So if I'm not mistaken, that's 2 large lots. Is that correct, Rachel? The village center, the acreage in the downtown. Is that 2 lots? 2
Correct.
owners, I should say.
Yes, 2 lots totaling about 50 acres.
So if we were going to guide development and it's owned by 2 different owners, could there be a way that they could creatively subdivide it to be able to sell it in smaller parcels to someone that would want to develop it? Because to develop 2 large parcels is a huge undertaking financially. And if we're going to guide development towards a village center, could we make it something that's attractive to the 2 owners to want to do? Or what are their long-term plans anyway? Do we know?
Well, the development company that owns the parcel that's closest to the South Street, they are focusing their efforts on their biotech portion of their development or their business. Again, multiple times that we've tried to reach out to them and they say that they're looking for somebody. They're waiting to get that big fish because I think that how they develop is, having like an anchor tenant and then trying to get people in around it. I don't know as though, from what I've seen, if that's what the town wants. But I also do think it's because they're focusing on the other aspects of their business right now. And they're sort of just holding on to this because with the zoning change, a lot more stuff can now happen on it. So regardless, they're going to make a profit on it, even if they do decide to sell, however, many years or that they decide. The parcel in the back, it was actually discovered when they were going to do an appraisal that it doesn't have any frontage. And that parcel was always a vacant parcel. It was kind of like a buffer or overflow for the, I think for the factory that was there. So it's never been developed. So now they're just like, well, we're not going to be able to get any money for it. So we might as well just hold on to it, because they can't develop it until they get frontage. And that's, talking to the people that are sort of holding out for their other business. It's very much a chicken and the egg or whatever type of a situation. Does that answer your question? Did I give you more questions than answers?
No, but it sounds complicated.
Yeah. And we can't subdivide it. The owners could subdivide it into as many lots as they wanted to and sell them off, but the town has no means to subdivide someone else's property.
Oh, no, I realize that. I just wondered if it was something that we could encourage them or make more attractive for them to do.
I'm sure if it was more attractive, that's what they'd already have done.
And when we did the rezoning, we actually contacted them and had them involved in that to some extent,
Right.
but things have changed since then.
Yeah, and I mean, the zoning down there is for the Village Zone B, which is that back. It requires 200 feet of frontage, a 2,500 square foot lot, but 200 feet of frontage. So it seems kind of off to me. You're going to be looking at like a very narrow back property. So again, but I think the main reason why it hasn't been developed is, besides the other things that I talked about, is the cost that's associated with doing a wastewater treatment facility. That's like, I don't know, millions of dollars. And without an anchor tenant that's going to be able to bring in that millions of dollars right off the bat, they're like, well, why even go through that? I don't know.
Leo, I see I think we're about to move on from this, but I see you have your hand raised. So I just wanted to make sure that we.
Yes, Ella asked for some input. I think the orange stickers make a whole lot of sense in terms of goals. what I see is it addresses two of the really big issues of our times, and that is the excessive cost of housing. And therefore, the fact is that we have people in town who can't afford buy homes in the town. And the second thing is the excessive use of land just to place a house on a lot. And we need to go ahead and figure out ways to preserve our land and yet still provide housing. So I like the result of all these stickers, and the process has worked well. Good job, Ella and Christian.
I like that. Excessive costs and excessive use of land. So it is pretty late. It's 6:20, but it was a great discussion. And before we move on, and I think we're going to wrap things up and call it a night so that Everett can join for the next discussion. And we'll do, actually our final exercise will be a scheduling exercise to figure out our next meeting so that we can focus on economic development. But are there any last thoughts about goals, housing goals for Wrentham? Again, we can figure out how to achieve these goals or how not to achieve these goals. But do these feel like the direction we want to head? And I can potentially wordsmith things, or people can wordsmith, but like, are we comfortable sharing this with the select board or the planning board, saying these are the 4 areas that we are forming consensus around that we want to address?
I'm happy with doing that. I would like a copy of this sticky board. Are you going to send that out to everybody? I'd like to look at all of these and try and see what fits with something else, and if we can come up with any other goals out of all of these sticky notes. It's a little too much to look at all at once.
Definitely.
And the other thing is, I'm one of those who gave you no comments because I really didn't understand what you wanted me to comment on.
Okay. I can clarify that. I think maybe sending what Jerry and I have drafted, as Jerry suggested, would be the easiest thing.
And Ella, if I can just ask one question, and I think the upper left-hand box might address this, but what's a little disturbing is that, you know, our firefighters, our teachers can't afford to live in the town that they're working in.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd like to see, and maybe it's the lower cost. They may not qualify as low income senior or disabled residents,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still in that income level that, you know, they can't afford to live in the town that they're working in. And I'd sure like to try to see something done so that we could, you know, help them out.
And I'd like to propose a small wording change to the upper right-hand one. It says discourage housing in isolated areas and open space. I would say and discourage dense housing in isolated areas. I think it's probably more the right wording, just my thought.
Okay. How about like large housing development?
Yes, maybe that. But a large one still could have 1 acre lots. That's, I think, the thing that they're trying to get around the idea of having the case that we're dealing with is they're putting houses very, very close together in the middle of nowhere.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we should revisit this one. Because I think
just
that
leave it
can
the
be
way it is,
better
and
for the environment. Okay.
We'll leave it the
Yeah, I
way
was
it is,
gonna say-
and we'll.
Are you against something like, you know, they're not exactly small, but the cluster, you know, the houses that are right next to the golf course in Franklin?
Yes,
You're against that?
I would much rather have a housing area that would be more like an apartment or a bunch of houses that you own that are apartments, and then that, because
Yeah.
it's as far as I'm concerned, it's the worst of an apartment and a separate house all in one place. It looks really crazy. That's my opinion, but that's my feeling.
Right, because there's still single-family houses that
Yes.
are not affordable to most.
Right.
But from a, that is the kind of development that it's better to have more houses on a smaller piece of property than from a, and I don't know what the proper wording is, but that is better for the environment to have that kind of cluster zoning. It's very popular in Canada, Europe. So
Yeah.
if you've traveled, that's everywhere.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. But as I said, I would much rather have that be more like an apartment complex instead.
Right. Right.
Where they're doing like, they don't have to have 4 walls that are all outside, which are environmentally not good and that kind of stuff. And you can still have a case where it's a property you own, so you get all the advantages of owning a house. And except it's now like more like an apartment than it is a separate house with separate walls. And you get to know your neighbors better that way, interestingly enough.
It's sort of interesting. In the 80s, I don't know, I'm old enough that's how we started out. We, had a condo for $56,000 in Millis. I mean, there were a lot of condo developments back in the 80s, and then it sort of stopped. And
yeah, and well, that's
you got to know your neighbors. It was great.
Yeah, condo. Yeah. Now, when I graduated from college, I lived in an apartment complex, and I knew my neighbors quite well, and they knew me.
Yeah, so it sounds like I did see some post-its around multifamily housing, which would be like condos.
Yeah.
Shared walls. Okay, so assuming that there are no further comments, and we can take a picture of this and also just write it up. I think it might be a little ambitious to go into economic development right now, but let's take a straw poll. Who wants to learn about economic development research and do goal setting for economic development right now versus who wants to postpone that and schedule another meeting? But we would have to schedule another meeting. We would try to schedule another meeting like next week, because we'd like to go to the select board and planning board in their first week of March to present some draft goals and see what they think. So preferably it would be in the next week. So those are the 2 options. Let's see. Is anyone wanting to keep going this evening? We certainly can. Does anyone want to keep going this evening and do economic development?
I'm ready to leave, but the rest of you can stay as long as you want.
Thanks, Everett.
Okay.
Everett, take care.
Yep.
Talk to you later, Billy.
Bye.
Ella, realistically, can we even do that in 30 minutes? Because I think other of us may have a hard stop at 7. And are we going to be trying to compress it too much in 30 minutes versus just trying to get another meeting, maybe an hour meeting next week?
I think that sounds great. I mean, I feel like I can get anything done in a half hour, but would it be the best process? Probably not. Okay. So let's go all have some dinner. I will type up the notes so that we can revisit this, or if you have new ideas and you go to sleep tonight and you come up with a brilliant goal, please send it our way. But let's schedule, I think that's a great idea, Jeff. We can just have a meeting that's focused on economic development, maybe an hour and 15 minutes to be safe. And I'd love to find a time to do that right now. So Christian, what do you think is what's the best way to find a time?
We could do a Zoom poll, but I don't see that option actually. But why don't I stop sharing first?
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay.
So how about next Thursday at 5 o'clock?
Who has objections or cannot make a particular night, find out which one has the fewest people missing.
Okay. Yeah, we can just go down the line. Yeah, I like that idea. How about? Next Thursday's not great for me, but I could do it if everyone's available. How about next Thursday at 5 o'clock?
Tuesday,
Thursday, so this exact
Thursday.
same time, but next week.
Leo says no.
Daryl as well. We have a conservation meeting at 7.
Okay, 2 can't do Thursday. All right, how about next Tuesday? Anytime next Tuesday.
I can do 5 next Tuesday.
I
Okay, with me.
can do,
Can anyone not do Tuesday at 5? All right, let's hope Everett can. That was amazing. Great. I'll send an invite now and we'll dig into economic development. Thank you all so much. And now you kind of know what we'll be doing, so you can go revisit those drafts that I sent and start thinking about economic development goals. And it was a really productive, great meeting. Thank you all so much. Any final comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Be safe. Take care.
Yeah,
bye,
thanks, everybody.
Thanks.